Hello, welcome to episode 394 of the Sunday New York Times Read Along, hosted by Sree Srinivasan and myself, Neil Parekh. We are live on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, Instagram, and our Digimentors website. Please like, comment, share, retweet, do all the things you do to help people find the show. We have so much to cover, and we weren't planning on it. Of course, the news from the White House Correspondents Association dinner last night really changes everyone's perspective. But before that, we were assuming we were going to be talking about the latest on Iran and the peace talks that got canceled last minute. Still trying to figure out what's going on there. And of course, there's President Trump's DOJ, Department of Justice, how he's using the Department of Justice. And we'll also do a remembrance of our good friend, Professor Andrew Hacker. So please join us and, comment. Let us know where you're watching from. Let us know what topics you're following today. Let's go ahead and bring on my co-host, Sree Srinivasan. Sree, welcome.
Hey, Neil. Good morning. It's freezing here in New York. Not exactly freezing, but very close
Yes, it's
to
cold.
32 degrees and very close to 0 degrees Celsius. But I just had walked our dog, and I'm excited to talk about all things to do with the news. You're seeing a little bit of my camera here, my iPhone, because we're going to try and show you the phone, the newspaper in a different way today and try to be a little more steady than I usually am. So we're playing around with this. You can therefore see a little bit of my computer on this side, and you can see a little bit of the living room. This is where you're watching the sausage being made, which is never fun, but I'm glad that you're all with us. Thank you so much. This is the Sunday New York Times Read Along. That's Neil Parekh. I'm Sree Srinivasan, and we are delighted to spend part of our Sunday with you. Neil will lead us through some housekeeping and and help us pay some bills, and then we'll get to the paper.
Absolutely. I will say, as ever, the producer, I'm the one that pointed out to Sree that, Sree, we can see your computer there a little bit in the shot. Sree's like, don't worry about it, Neil. It's okay. It doesn't have to be perfect. But, for what that's worth. But let's go ahead and do a few of our announcements. Of course, we want to thank and recognize our longtime sponsor, Muckrack, and our newer sponsor, Graphic History Company, for their support of the Sunday New York Times Read Along. Thank you so much for all of the support that you've given us over the years. We also want to, of course, acknowledge that the Sunday New York Times Read Along is produced by Digimentors, the social digital firm that Sree started with his good friend Andrew Lee. We do digital marketing, events and digital programs, strategic communications, trainings, and workshops. And we also help with staffing and recruiting. We've also done a lot more with AI recently, and Sree will tell you a little bit about that as well. Some workshops that he's leading on artificial intelligence and helping us understand the tools that are out there. As a reminder, we are also on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. So shortly after the episode is over, we upload the video to Spotify, and you can listen to it or watch it wherever you are to make it a little bit more convenient. It's something folks have asked for years, and we've finally put that together for you. So with that, we will get back to our show.
Thanks, Neil. It's great to be here and to be with you on a Sunday. What a fun way to spend the Sunday talking about the news with so much going on in the world. Everyone, please tag your friends. Please share with them live on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, LinkedIn, as well as digimentors.group. If you can't join us live. If your friends can't join us live, they can watch us later on all of these platforms. John says, greetings from the East Village. So you'll be happy to know that Rupa's book has arrived safely. Yes, I am. Thank you for subscribing, not subscribing, buying the book. It's now available in India at a shop, and they sell it. They send it to America at a store from a store called Midland Books. She's
Oh
still
wow.
working on getting a US publisher. So they do it. It's actually interesting, Neil. They do any book out of India for about $25 all in, which is, of course, the price that a hardcover book is in the
Yeah.
US.
I was surprised. I knew that it had been released in India, and I didn't know how John had gotten it from there. But $25 for a book is not that bad when you think about it.
Yeah, especially a hardcover book and all of that. So it's called The Jasmine Murders. For anyone watching in India, please get it. If you're in the US, you can find it at Midland Books in India and you can have it shipped here. Let's see who else is watching. Miriam, good morning. I've signed in from Hell's Kitchen in New York City. Welcome. So we've got the village covered and Hell's Kitchen. And here is Fort Lauderdale Beach. Deborah Kerr is with us, a former guest and good friend. Ken is watching from Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Warmer here at 50 degrees. Normally, Iowa is colder. Diane Stefani is watching from Margate, New Jersey. Welcome, Diane. And Pradnya is watching from the Pediatric Academies meeting in Boston, hanging with brilliant pediatricians and neonatologists this morning. Please thank them all for their amazing work in this very crucial time when we have the establishment, the healthcare establishment in this country is run by a person who should not be anywhere near anyone's healthcare, including his own. And he's instead running healthcare for the entire nation.
It's absolutely ridiculous. It's one of the things that Sree, when we were watching the and doing what we could with the elections in 2024, we knew that RFK Jr. was likely going to get a prominent role in the next administration. And as crazy as we knew that Trump was, we thought that maybe knowing that RFK Jr. was going to get a role would help convince people not to vote for him. And obviously that did not come to pass.
Yeah, it was interesting to watch the grilling he got from two Senate committees this week, and just the way he speaks, the way he sounds because of his own health issues and the worm in his brain and everything else. That he is so problematic. But the MAGA base just wanted a change, and that also affected others as well. And the fact is that America's healthcare system is broken. And when somebody comes along and says, we'll make America healthy again, that resonates. That has an impact. And that's why we're seeing that. Mary C. Curtis is with us. Good morning from Charlotte, North Carolina. Just returned from the Religion News Association in Atlanta, talking about religion and politics. And shameless plug, received an award for my Equal Time podcast. Yay, everyone. Check out
Yay.
Equal Time. Great podcast with a great host and great guests. And Mary, we're so happy for you. Mary was with us live in 2024, that November, over the 3-day period, probably 6, 7, 8 hours of live coverage. And here we are, Mary. They didn't listen to us. Grace
Absolutely.
and greetings from New York, Patricia.
Yeah. Our friend Patricia Freudenberg. And John said he thinks he's subscribed to the Sree Substack as well. Sree, what's on tap for your Substack?
Yeah,
What's
thank
coming
you.
up?
Great question, and thank you, John, for bringing that up. We are excited to bring you our Substack from later today. We're going to be talking about all kinds of things around AI and more, but I don't know why there's that very enhanced AI picture you're seeing on your screen. That's a conversation I had with Christina, who's a great AI philosopher. You may not even know there are people with roles like that. And in the conversation, we talked about what's happening in the world of AI and what needs to change in order for us to be able to cover the, and have a better impact in the world of AI. And last week we wrote about the environment being for sale, which most of you know is a big issue in the US. So that was our newsletter last week. So I was waiting to see if there are any developments around the White House Correspondents' dinner with the assailant, the accused, etc. But I've not heard anything yet. So if you can, please subscribe. Sree's Sunday Note. Every Sunday we publish, and then we give you extra content thanks to our paid subscribers. So you don't have to pay for our content, but we'd love for you to subscribe. And if you can pay, that'll be great. So thank you very much, John, and appreciate you very much for being a subscriber.
Absolutely. Absolutely. John Lee is in the house, good friend of ours. Thank you so much for all of your support. John, of course, is a former guest on the show and is the co-host of the Irish Stew podcast, which you should certainly listen to. Always fun to see the new guests and topics that they have on tap. Our friend Stephen Kaplan is also saying good morning and hope everyone is well. So thank you. And Amy McIntyre is up early. Good morning from the Olympic Peninsula of Washington State.
We have two Amy's who watch from early morning, early risers. And Neil's sister Amy is also in Washington State. So we have to say hi to both Amy's. Let's take a look very quickly at the paper, and then we'll see what are the other headlines to talk about. But I usually like to just glance at the Saturday paper to see what the headlines were yesterday. And let's pull that up here so you can see that the headlines were: war has drained a critical supply of U.S. weapons, munitions costs soar, readiness to confront other potential foes is questioned. That's a big issue. Especially if anything happens with Taiwan, there are just not enough weapons for America to defend Taiwan. Gold miners have cleared the forests and grasslands along the Nechi River in Colombia. Somebody help me pronounce it correctly. The brightly colored pools pockmarking the area contain mining pollution. So that's what you're seeing here. Health law lets doctors cash in. Patient safeguard has unintended effect. Ooh, that sounds like a kind of unintended consequences. I've not read that story. U.S. Mint buys drug cartel gold and sells it as American. This is life in the Trump era, Neil. Federal law requires coins like this be minted only from newly mined American gold. But here we are buying drug cartel gold.
But Sree, we were buying gold from drug cartels or using seized gold?
I don't know. I don't know.
I mean, the headline implies that we're putting money in the hands of drug cartels. I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, I presume it's the seized part. But you know, with this government, you never know. And this is something that I've thought about a lot. There's a big movie coming about Michael Jackson, and Jackson's music proves too big to be canceled by scandals. A biopic that casts Michael Jackson in a friendly light opened this weekend, and I went to see the MJ musical, and I was very, very conflicted about it, you know. But they did something very interesting at the MJ musical on Broadway. The first line, almost the very first line, is, how do you separate the art from the artist? And they don't get into the more complicated stuff because they end right before the major scandals start. As you remember, there were these lightweight scandals, such as him sleeping in an oxygen tank and having a monkey as a best friend and all of that stuff. But it was the serious, terrible accusations about sexual assault and other things with young boys that didn't start till the show ended, where the story ends in the show.
Sree, one of the headlines I saw was that there is a family that had been close to Michael Jackson for a number of years, and that they had actually defended his name against these allegations until recently. They've actually, I think they filed a lawsuit alleging
Here it is.
A long-time sexual abuse. That's right on cue. Jackson's second family files abuse suit. Go ahead and read that subhead. I can't read that from here.
the siblings who once vouched for Michael Jackson now say they sexually assaulted him. The Cascio siblings are Dominic, Aldo, Marie Nicole, and Eddie, who are suing the estate of Michael Jackson. And so there's a woman in here as well who is involved. So the headline is, so it's in December 2010, Oprah Winfrey invited Dominic and Connie Cascio and 3 of their 5 children to talk about Michael Jackson. So it goes on from there. So I will be wanting to read it. Neil, how do you wrestle not just with Michael Jackson, but with anyone who has done amazing work that's art of some kind, whether it's music in Michael Jackson or Woody Allen and his classic films about New York? How do you approach that?
Sree, I'll say that I have a visceral reaction to that. As as our viewers know, I'm a survivor of sexual abuse myself. I don't have any quarter, any tolerance for that in terms of the art being more important, etc. If you go down the list, Bill Cosby, I think, comes to mind as the number one example. As far as I'm concerned, when those allegations are overwhelming and are just incontrovertible, I don't care. I don't care for that person anymore. I can't think of a particular artist that I have made an exception for. It just changes your entire understanding of that person and the art or the work. I mean, you can talk about Cesar Chavez as well. And I know that there's a follow-up article. There was a follow-up article in yesterday's Times about the art, all the murals that were drawn about Cesar Chavez, and then what happens to that artwork. That's a kind of a secondary issue. But no, I don't have any interest in the art after the artist has been exposed like that.
Thank you, Neil, for sharing that. I know your bravery in talking about your own circumstances, which happened to you when you were young. Your ability to talk about it on this show, on your other show, Shining Light on Shadows, has been very important for so many people. So thank you, as always, for talking about it. And I understand your point of view. It's very, very important. And as I said, this is something that a lot of us wrestle with. This is the story you mentioned. I thought I was reading the Saturday papers. I was showing you all the Saturday paper. I was actually showing you the Sunday paper. So this is the Saturday paper, and this is what you were talking about. With Chavez's legacy stained, what do you do with art in tribute? Murals and monuments are now seen in a dimmer light. And I'm somebody, Neil, who, as you know, worked at Columbia Journalism School, where the very first thing you see when you walk onto campus and up towards the building, the very first thing you see in front of Columbia Journalism School is a statue of Thomas Jefferson, who was a great champion of the First Amendment and the rights of the press and everything else. But he has, of course, through history, now we know that he was someone who raped many of the slaves he had under him and did terrible things. And so this idea that we have to face the stories of these people is important. We much closer to today, even than Michael Jackson, is what's happening in the Epstein files. And some of the biggest names in the world have now been caught up, including people who have done important work. Bill Gates comes to mind, or Larry Summers, or Noam Chomsky. These are big names that were as big in their respective worlds as Michael Jackson was in his world. And to to never talk of them again, to never deal with the work they've done is going to be difficult for most people. But from the point of view of those who have survived sexual assault and rape and other situations, horrendous, terrible situations, it's difficult to even imagine people talking about it. But you can think about this with Harvey Weinstein and the movies that he's made, that including Shakespeare in Love, which I love. What do I do with that film? So this is an important moment for us as we look at the world and see these folks who are playing outsized roles in our lives. And maybe that's the beginning point where maybe we shouldn't make these people to be heroes to begin with.
I think that one thing to consider, Sree, as you bring up some excellent examples, that we have to have a way of understanding where we draw that line. For example, Bill Gates. I think that there's the association with Epstein. There are the questions about his role. I haven't seen kind of very specific allegations of rape or abuse against him specifically with a specific survivor, unless I missed something. But does that mean that we shouldn't? Now he's no longer at, but should we not use Windows products? Should we not use Microsoft products? Or Harvey Weinstein, as you said, I mean, when someone is that influential in the industry, any movie that he produced, I mean, that's a long list of artwork. I think it's different in terms of a Bill Cosby or Woody Allen. If you focus on where they starred or where they're visible in a show, so the Cosby Show, okay, has a whole different light now. Woody Allen movies, I was a huge fan of Woody Allen when I was younger. And then when the allegations came up, I really didn't care. I didn't go back and watch anything. That wasn't interested in the movies. It's kind of, there's a parallel, Sree, I think, around politics where people want to, maybe boycott or change where they, how they use their dollars based on the political support of large companies. So with these large, corporate, if Procter and Gamble, for example, gives to the Republican Party, does that mean you're not going to use any products that come from the Procter and Gamble, manufacturing? That's harder. Or shop at Target, for example, if they give to both sides.
Mm-hmm. Well, and we're not going to solve this issue today, and we may never will, but it is an important conversation point. And Naomi brings up the point that just even the ownership of slaves, of course, is inexcusable. And what do we do with George Washington? What do we do with Thomas Jefferson and the other slave-owning presidents, founding fathers who did a lot of good in the world and caused other issues as well?
Alexander Hamilton did not own slaves.
Right.
I'll just
and that's one of the reasons why schools and parents and kids embraced the musical so much. I was surprised, Neil, to learn that 10 years later, a friend's 10-year-old is as obsessed with Hamilton as my children were when they were, when they were 12, 10 years ago, when Hamilton was at its peak in 2016. I figured, after all of these years, and there's been some controversy about some of the storytelling, etc., that it wouldn't last. But because of Disney Plus, they run the show all the time on there, so you can watch it any time you want. So kids are still very much interested in that. And since you mentioned Bill Gates, or I mentioned that you mentioned, there is writing, in writing, there's emails from Bill Gates to Jeffrey Epstein that I'm going to paraphrase, that are saying something like, because of one of your girls, Jeffrey, I gave Melinda a venereal disease, and and I now, how do I treat her without her knowing? What medicines can I give her without her knowing?
That's right.
That itself is criminal assault, physical assault on giving medicines to someone without their knowing, for whatever reason. Especially an adult, you don't treat you don't decide to play doctor when you're the world's richest man, writing to Jeffrey Epstein. So even the circumstances around it are so stupid, but that this would happen and that he would even contemplate that is a major issue for me and for so many other people as well. But let's keep going, otherwise we will get stuck on this. and we should talk about other things. Naomi's watching from Rhode Island. Thank you. Tumultuous DC is where Debbie is
Yes.
watching, and a chance for you to say hi to one Sudha Parekh.
Sudha Parekh says, "Good morning from Hastings on Hudson. Pleasure to have you join us this week, Sudha. It's always great to have loyal viewers. Anyone who's not familiar, new viewers, that's my mom right there on this side. That's my mom watching. My mom watches almost every week, and thank you. I do call her outside of Sundays. I don't want anyone to think that this is the only time we interact. We have a better relationship than that. I'll just leave it there.
And to everyone who is lucky enough to have a mom or a dad or both with us, please call them every week, every day. Call them now or watch afterwards, because it's too important. When you
a couple times a week,
when you lose the opportunity, you'll never get it back, as you can imagine. And I've lived through that, so I know. The Irish 2 podcast says, "Thank you, Neil, for saying good things about the podcast." And here's Ron Thomas watching from Verona. Ron, you're here. Let's meet. Ron's usually in Dubai, but he is here now. A little later, we will be talking
Claudia.
about Andrew Hacker. Neil, over to you.
No, thank you, Sree. I was not actually looking ahead at the comments, so that came up as a surprise to me. Claudia, thank you so much for joining us. We are going to be talking about Andrew Hacker, our very good friend. Here is the picture from the New York Times obit, the story. For those of you who may have missed the news, Andrew Hacker, a former 2-time guest on the show, passed away earlier this week. Claudia is his beloved wife, former guest on the show as well. And I saw some of the posts that Claudia was sharing this week as Andrew's health took that last turn for the worst. And we have so many fond memories of our conversations with Andrew about the election, the predictions. This goes back to the first for the 2020. Was it the 2020 elections, Sree?
2020 elections, where I was very skeptical on camera with Andrew. He said that Trump would lose. He said that whenever we met, might have been July, August, when I was of 2020. And he said he will definitely lose. And I was skeptical on camera. We'll pull up a clip for next week. So tell us what you have in store for next week.
Yeah, so Claudia will be joining us next week for a tribute to Andrew. She'll join us at the top of the show, and we'll share a few memories. We'll talk about their relationship just a little bit. And I still think the story about how they met is fascinating. But we'll also talk a little bit about some of the times where they actually disagreed. Sree, they didn't, as any good couple, they have differences of opinion. So she'll share a little bit about that, and she's also planning, Sree, a memorial service in Manhattan. I believe May 28th is the date that she settled on at the Ethical Culture School. So we will share details about that as well. But again, for those who may have missed, please.
No. So for those of you who missed, our friend Andrew Hacker has passed away, age 96. The obit subhead is, in a host of books and articles as a political scientist, he attacked ideas on the battle of the sexes, usefulness of high school math, and other subjects. But we know him best on this show as a political scientist who predicted accurately that Trump would lose the 2020 election. And I thought that was very important, that the timing of when he said it. Claudia, my personal condolences. Thank you for being a part of the New York Times read-along family, for being a guest in other circumstances, and we're sorry that this is what is bring you back on the show next week, but we're very grateful. And folks, we do this every Sunday. We talk about the news, we talk about newspapers, we talk about the New York Times, but we've done this with the Washington Post, we've done this with the Toronto Globe and Mail, the Khaleej Times in Dubai. So we are about news and the ways to talk about news more than anything else. We just use the New York Times as a way to talk about all of this stuff. Let's see who's watching. Raju says, great, sir, watching from Nepal. That's wonderful. And Paula Kiger, longtime host, producer of the show, is watching from Tallahassee. And Pragya says that we should be saying enslaved people, not slaves. So that's interesting to me. I've heard
Language.
this here and there, but I have not seen that as I assume this is in the same vein, Neil, as saying undocumented instead of illegal aliens, etc. I will now try to use that when I can. I know it's the same thing with actress and actor. I just find it, I'm just old enough and my brain is the way it is that I find it very difficult to say actor when I say Julia Roberts. It's just I know it's wrong, but I just can't help it. And so let's talk. I'd like to get your thoughts on that. Let's move to the DC shooting because we definitely need to talk
Sure.
about that. Yeah.
Just the one comment, Sree, I think this is a little bit more than that in that it emphasizes enslaved people, emphasizes what was done to someone as opposed to their kind of being a slave as a human. I think it's more similar to talking about people who are homeless, but instead regarding people who are experiencing homelessness. It's a change in the way, in kind of the perspective of where the action is. But yes, we do want to. Doug is talking about the references to Bill Gates earlier. Rich does not equal smart, certainly. And Ron Thomas's mom is watching. So what this is, just to explain this for folks, if you're watching on Facebook, you will get a little notification when somebody else joins the show. Even if they don't comment, you get a little notification at the top that so-and-so is watching. We don't see that. So we don't know, for example, that your mom is watching, Ron. Thank you for letting us know. I know that my mom always lets us know when friends of hers are tuning in.
Pratnya says exactly, Neil, about the comments we just made. And Vinay is watching. And Patricia says, may Andrew Hacker's legacy live on, and sends her love and deepest condolences. Naomi says, I always text my kids asking when they can call. Aretha explains succinctly, Hari, S-P-E-C-T. And Vinay is watching from Geneva. And I'm sorry to say that Ron's mom has passed away. He was talking about your mom watching.
I'm sorry, Ron.
Yeah, this is what happens when we're all moving so quickly. But this is, I'm sure Ron understands that he was talking about your mom watching. So that's. I was so blessed when my own mom would watch our show and comment. I love that. And so this is. And by the way, Neil, it's very hard to tell it for people our age who is with us and who's not with us. So I often will say, are your parents still with us? I will say that, I'll couch that when talking to people, even my own friends who have known for many years. It's hard to keep track sometimes. And so when people say to me something about my mom, I don't hold any ill will towards somebody who says something about my mom thinking she's still alive, because they don't know. And how can you keep track with everything horrible happening in the world? How can anybody keep track? So that makes it really hard. But let's talk now about the DC shooting and what happened there. There was so much confusion. I wasn't watching the White House Correspondents' dinner. I was planning to catch the highlights. I was disappointed that there wasn't a comedian. Instead, there was a mentalist who was performing. Mentalist, I guess, is another name for what we used to call a mind reader, magician, something like that, trickster. I was hoping that he would be kind of doing a mind tricks on Jedi mind tricks on Mr. Trump and getting him to get the whole cabinet there.
I don't want to say that I mean, especially because of the work I do on mental health, Sree, but we have a mentalist there. We have someone who was maybe mental, at the dais and Donald Trump. But I mean, it just was an odd juxtaposition to have him there.
So let me give
But
you 3, 4 thoughts on what I was thinking, and then I want to hear
yeah,
how you felt watching the news unfold in real time. You weren't sure anything except that Trump and the cabinet were safe, and that's really important for America to not have our presidents, our public officials shot at. It is not acceptable for any reason. I first thought maybe this is an attack on the press because, after all, the press is gathered there as well. But from the reporting now so far, it seems that this was, in fact, somebody going after Trump at the busiest, most high-profile event of the year. So that tells you that's complicated decision by that person. Other thoughts: watching a Kennedy being dragged away from a assassination attempt, RFK Jr., for all his issues, the fact that his father, his uncle, were among the most prominent and most influential people ever to be assassinated, to have that trauma in that family is certainly something that came to my mind. Also, the fact that we learned that there was no metal screenings or magnetometers to get into the hotel. There was to get into the ballroom, but to get into the hotel, there was no such impediment, which is crazy. In India, even in smaller towns, every hotel makes you go through bag screening as well as they either wand you down or go through a magnetometer or both. And they didn't do any of that for this hotel. Is ridiculous. And Neil, you and I have been in Mumbai, where we had to, every time we come in and out, even though the people know us, you have to take off your, everything, put it aside. It's not like TSA screening, but it's certainly better than nothing at all. So all of that was going through my mind. How about you, Neil?
yeah, it was really interesting. I hadn't been paying attention to the White House Correspondents' Dinner. I remember seeing some headline about some alternate dinner, or some comedian doing something. I can't remember what that was. But then I did see this post from our good friend Steve Herman, who is a former White House correspondent, and saying that I decided to skip attending the White House Correspondents Association dinner. Although with President Trump, it should be interesting. I'll watch on C-SPAN. And this was, posted, earlier in the evening. I think around 6, 7, maybe 8 o'clock, 7 o'clock in the evening. And obviously things went. And we saw messages back and forth in some of the WhatsApp groups that we're in, where people didn't know what was going on. There was just chaos, and there was the reporting was unclear. This is a good example of when the New York Times, with the print edition, when there's overnight news, unfortunately just can't keep up, and you need to rely on the online presence to see what's going on. So I'm going to bring up the homepage of the New York Times real quickly, just to kind of show how they're covering the events from yesterday. And so they have video on the front page, right above the fold. You'll see that of the chaos, and then the security, Secret Service rushing to the dais and escorting the president and first lady out. I've seen other video from the event showing people under tables and kind of crouching, waiting for the all clear. But I would say, Sree, just like any other event that we are, the president's involved in, there's so much that doesn't make sense. The president sharing on Truth Social information about the attacker, about the status of the dinner, saying the dinner should go on. just minutes after maybe things settle down. It just there's so much. Yes, this was some type of attempt, some type of violence was intended that evening. But President Trump's reaction is always just wrong, and it's hard to understand what the man is thinking. Where he's saying, he's giving live updates on the investigation, on the suspect, on the status of the attacker, on what's happening with the event. That's not what he should be doing. I mean, yes, it's a scary moment, and everyone was thankfully safe. But why can't he just keep his mouth shut?
Well, that's a question we'll never know the answer to. It's part of his projecting strength, his showing that we can move on and all of that. That's the bravado that he's showing. Deborah Kerr had a good comment. Wonder if the mentalist foresaw the event which unfolded. And Dan says that Oz Perlman, the mentalist, is amazing. Catch parts of his talent when you
He's
can.
The person who was there.
And Doug Levy watching from California at 6:11 a.m. The confusion in the initial reporting was astounding, considering there were hundreds of journalists a few yards away. And someone had a good joke that hundreds of journalists were there. That means we won't ever find out what happened. We'll have to wait for the books to find out what happened. And I'm having trouble with my WhatsApp, Neil, so I can't pull up our friend Priscilla Huff, who was in the ballroom. So if you have a couple of her comments you just want to read out, just for people to understand that this is how close things are, that people in our immediate circles were in that room. And Debbie says that Todd Blanche, who is, I believe, acting attorney general, was on the news this morning. And Dan says CNN was the spot from where Wolf Blitzer a few feet away, and recounting events to John Miller. Sourced info and his analysis was excellent. So thank you for that. And then Vinay says, why don't we see follow up through all the assassination attempts on Trump? Is a question from Geneva. Who was that person who was shot dead in Butler, Pennsylvania, accused of being the assassin? We know almost nothing about that person now. And the person who was arrested on a golf course, he didn't pull the trigger, but that is also an example. Mary says, not on the shooting, but the concept of journalists mingling with the folks they cover encourages a closeness that reminds me of why Watergate's story was broken by a Metro reporter and a Virginia suburban reporter, and not by an insider White House reporter. Excellent comment there from Mary, who knows DC so well. My former colleague and boss at Columbia Journalism School, Nick Lemon, was the New Yorker's Washington correspondent, and he got scoops and stories that others didn't. You know why, Neil? Because he didn't live in Washington. He lived in Pelham, New York, would go down on Tuesday, and go down on Monday or Tuesday, spend a couple of days, talk to people, and come back and write. In those 2 days, he was able to penetrate the sourcing issue without becoming chubby with them. And that's why he was such a great New Yorker, New York-based Washington reporter for so many years. And I'm glad that Steve Herman didn't go. While all this is happening, another perspective is that there was a petition going around demanding that Trump be disinvited from this event. For our international folks who don't follow all this, every year the president would go to these things, the former presidents, sitting presidents, apart from Donald Trump in 2016, would go. And this is the first time he was there, and he was on the podium when all of this went down. And we are now seeing the effects of his being there and what that's done. We're so lucky nothing happened beyond the shooting, and I'm surprised that the shooter is alive, because that's typically not what happens in stories like this, Neil.
Yeah, it really is. It's incredible, and again, that whole question of how the shooter got so close to the event itself, without the as you said, the security screening for the building, to get into the building. Granted, it was in the room itself.
Yeah. And here, great point, Mary, says John, and that he says, I don't think legitimate journalists should have gone to this. And Naomi and Pradnya have a little back and forth about the state of the language and how it's evolving. And I was in on that too. Obama roasted Trump when he attended as a civilian. After that, Trump was never a fan of this event or the media. And in fact, a much larger point, Debbie, a lot of us believe that 2011 roast of Donald Trump, an accidental roast. It was unintended at first, but then once Obama knew Trump was sitting there, in scripted remarks, he went after him in some very funny comments. So did Seth Meyers. And this was, if you remember the timing, Neil, was Obama had greenlit the attack on Abbottabad on President on Osama bin Laden,
Osama bin
and
Laden.
then come to this, uh, did the roast of Donald Trump, did the event. Then we heard that the killing had happened, and then he gave that very measured, non-excited news to the world that he had been killed, as opposed to when Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi was killed in the Trump administration. Trump went in and said he died like a dog and all this terrible, as you said, there's nothing that Trump does the right way, the presidential way. And so we're
Yeah.
used to seeing that. But a lot of us say that or believe that Trump, who was always thinking of running, that day he decided he's definitely running, and we've now seen the consequences of that. Here's Priscilla's comments. Thank you, Neil, for pulling that up. Priscilla, I'm in the ballroom. The president is in the beast. That's what the presidential limo is called. I said, stay safe. And the incident happened past the ballroom doors, up a flight of stairs. I'm fine. Some folks are understandably freaked out. So thank you, Neil, for sharing
I
that.
had
And
this
Priscilla,
the
thank you for being safe.
continuation,
Yeah.
Sree, where she says the program is resuming at 9:25. And colleagues said they thought that they were going to cancel the event. No, they're about to feed us at 9:27. So again, there's so much around that. I mean, that should have been, and some of the parties, I can understand some of the parties continuing afterward as a gathering space for people. Okay, like there was an incident. What I read somewhere, you shut down the room, you interview witnesses. It's a crime scene. Once you let people go, okay. I mean, the event's over. There's no more event. There's no dinner. Once people are allowed to leave, okay, if they go to the after party to kind of process what just happened or kind of be with friends, that's a different story. But the idea that they continued with dinner shortly after an attempt like this is still hard to fathom.
Well, I will say, as an event organizer who does major galas, not as big as this, obviously, but major events all the time, my concern was, what happens to all the meals, thousands of meals prepared, and these people
Sure.
do need to eat, and the staff needs to get paid, and all of that stuff. What happens? That's where insurance comes in. But all that food, I hope they gave it to people who are experiencing homelessness, because that would be a tragedy if any of that food
That's right.
was thrown out. So that would be
So,
terrible.
Sree, just a quick technical issue. If you may need to refresh your screen, we lost your. There we go. Your video is back on the monitor.
Well, thank you. So, folks, we should have actually, Neil, started with the DC story. We're so wedded to the dynamics of the newspaper that we got caught in this, and that's why my friend Dan Foreman, who has been a producer in my ear on ABC, NBC, and CBS appearances that I've done over the years when I had a full TV career, he was doing that here. He was texting and saying, "What about the DC news?" That's why you need somebody coming from the outside. Your mom says that Shooter was a teacher with a master's degree. I've not read about him at all, and I'm kind of shocked to hear that. Mary says Dana Milbank does not go, and this administration could care less about throwing away the food.
That's true.
That's very true. We only have about 10 minutes left, and we've got so much to look at. So I'm just going to very quickly go through the paper, Neil, if that's
Please,
okay.
please.
Let's see. So we looked at the front page. Was one outrageous thing after another. Kiev floats idea of naming an area Donnyland. Peace-seeking appeal to Trump on Donbass. That's actually pretty smart to do that. Here is the T magazine, the New York Times style magazine. Because you and I are neither of us are fashion icons, we haven't paid enough
Speak for
attention to this.
yourself.
But how
Oh
to
my
be
God.
how to be cultured. A highly idiosyncratic compendium of what you need to know right now, chosen by experts and starring our hosts Greta Lee, Barry Keoghan, and Jeffrey White. Jeffrey, I know, but these other people I don't know. A guide to planning your wedding. I guess wedding season is in June, Neil. So it's kind of late to have this. Maybe it's for next year. I don't know why they have this at this moment. We did have a
It'd be too
wonderful.
late.
Yeah, if you remember, we had this wonderful interview we did with one of the writers of the vows
Yes.
column in the New York Times, which was so much fun. And it was in June or July that we did that. Sunday Styles cover is made in Japan, cotton 100%. The Japanese designers changing menswear, mixing a basic appearance with opulent fabrics. New labels have found their way to the West. And the Trump effect on men's looks. In the president's orbits, women aren't the only ones concerned about their appearances. There have been stories about shoes that men are forced to wear and how they dress and all of that stuff. So I don't know if I want to read this, but I might. I don't know. Sunday New York Times Magazine. I don't know if we can come back from this. The view inside Trump's DHS. We were talking earlier about RFK Jr., an oral history by Rachel Poser, Emily Bazelon, and Matthew Purdy. Wow, what a cover this is. This is, so I'm sorry, I confused DHS and the healthcare system. Sorry, Department of Homeland Security, though this could have also been this could have also been the healthcare system. This is about
Can you
ICE
bring it
and,
down
yeah.
just
Sorry.
a little bit? Yeah. So we see. Okay. So
Yeah.
read that headline again.
I don't know how we can come back from this. The view inside Trump's DHS. I was thinking this is about the healthcare system, but I do want to say that our daughter, Durga Srinivasan, who many of you have seen and follow at Durga NYC, is leading the Bronx efforts of the largest anti-ICE organization in America, called Hands Off New York. And we're so proud of her, but also so worried about her. And it's because of situations like this that are part of the news and
Well,
what is actually happening on the ground.
I'll just say, if you can bring that magazine back, Sree, in looking at that, just in terms of the aesthetics, down a little bit more, so we see the full, the headline, the masthead, and the text above, the red.
Blood red.
To me, it's a hellscape. It looks like it's actually hell that they're evoking with those colors.
By the way, one of the stories here is Michael Jackson's makeover movie. So they're talking about what's happening. So that's 3 Michael Jackson big stories in the Times in 2 days. This one, and then the front page story in today's paper about the movie, and yesterday about the siblings who had vouched for Michael and now accuse him of sexual misconduct. So in fact, all 3 might have even been today. This is so.
Was it today's paper? That's what I was curious about, because
this is
that
today's paper.
juxtaposition
This is
really
today.
interesting.
Yeah, this is today. And then I'm not sure. Oh, the brothers, the siblings were yesterday's paper. So 3
Okay.
Michael Jackson stories in major front pages today, or is front page sections today and yesterday. The book review cover, speaking of musical legends, Fab Five, where the music had to go, John Windolph traces the influence of that Bob Dylan and the Beatles had on each other and on rock and roll. Oh, never thought about
what's
that.
on the top
And there
half?
he is. There's just
Oh, yeah.
just his book review. But there's Bob Dylan and the Fab Five, And if you haven't seen it, the movie called Yesterday about the Beatles and a world without the Beatles is one of my favorite films.
Yeah.
Almost no one I know has seen it. But those of us who have seen it
Oh,
have
I
seen it
love it.
multiple times. Yeah, you love it. So I see, I didn't
Yeah.
even know you've seen it, but most people in all the biopics that came out, remember there was a rush of biopics. There was Bruce Springsteen
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
Elton John and Queen, all of those
Queen before
movies.
that. Yeah.
This was lost in that mix. Sunday Opinion. Why can't more Democrats talk like Graham Plantner? He's a veteran running in Maine. End forever war, slash the Pentagon budget, bring American troops home from the Middle East. Those are his demands. He's running against the deplorable Susan Collins, who sometimes is not so deplorable, but she's the one who always draws the line and then crosses it herself before Trump can cross it.
Didn't we have a presidential candidate say that we should end the wars in the Middle East and bring everyone home? I'm trying to remember.
Yes, these
It
two
was just a
points.
couple of years ago.
These 2 points for sure. And he said, "I know more than the generals." And he
In the
also
generals.
called everybody who was buried in the Normandy. He called them losers because they lost.
Yeah.
He also said John McCain was a loser because he was
Yeah.
he was shot down and taken hostage. My quest to solve Bitcoin's greatest mystery is by John Carreyrou, who's the person who did the big book and investigation of Theranos and Elizabeth Holmes. So I'm going to be reading this piece and trying to understand.
That's about the identity of the founder, right? I
Yes,
think.
correct. Here, Together in Struggle, in Fear of 13 on Broadway, stars Adrian Brody as a man unjustly convicted of murder and Tessa Thompson as a death row volunteer who falls
Let's
in
see
love
their
with him.
faces. Sri, let's see their
Yeah,
faces
sorry,
on
sorry,
the.
sorry. Yeah, sorry.
It's just
We're
the
we're
angle
we're
is.
getting used to this new way of handling
It's
the
hard.
paper. So yeah, it's hard. So that's Adrian Brody and that's Tessa Thompson. Last
Yeah.
couple of things before we go. Real estate cover is here's the story of a house named Brady. Oh wow, is that the home from
Yes.
Brady Bunch?
Yep.
How much
I
would you
saw
pay,
the.
Neil? Would you want to live
I
in
don't
that
know
house?
that. The exterior, right? It's the
Yeah.
insides.
The insides were
That
probably
was a
in a
pretty
studio
great.
anyway. Yeah, in a studio.
But there was a great office off the living room that the father had. Let's not get into all the issues around the Brady's and the actors and the relationships.
Oh
and
yeah, sure.
all
I don't
that.
even know all that. I don't even know all that. But they were famous in terms of American history and pop culture history. They were, I believe, the very first show to show a married couple with a double bed as opposed to twin beds.
Yeah.
And that was a moment in America that then opened the floodgates to being able to show that. Renewal at the subway's core is about the $4 billion plan to upgrade aging electrical substations, and alfresco dining dwindles everywhere. If any of you came during the pandemic to New York
Really?
and loved the alfresco dining, that's diminishing because the car lobby is very upset, and the anti-rat lobby is upset by all the things that happen as a result. So I think that those are now you're seeing far fewer of those. Did you like them?
I think it's expanding actually here in at least in Alexandria. I've seen more some streets being blocked off, some expansion of the space they give for restaurants. So I'm curious of kind of what that trend is maybe nationally.
Dan says in New York City, the law is that once food is prepared by humans, it cannot be donated. Then I wonder how the city harvest and Meals on Wheels, all of those things that collect food from restaurants, how that works. Maybe it's by prepared for. I know the rule is also that if it lands on the table, it cannot be taken back. So Neil, do you know anything about that?
I don't, but that might be it.
Yeah.
If it's
Food
served.
pantries in DC need food donations legal to give. That's a great question, and that goes back to that. Oh, look at this. I've always feel like DHS should be a health agency too. Amy, thank you. As I screwed up, I now feel a little bit better. Mary says, for those who are in love with Graham Plattner, choosing to ignore his comments
Yes.
on blacks and women and his tattoos, remember how they chose to ignore John Fetterman pointing a weapon and chasing a black jogger. Some incidents say something about character. So important. Neil, this goes back to our whole character conversation about stars. This is where, do we take the best of the worst that we can get, or the worst of the best? What, I don't know how you would, lesser of all the evils. This is a question that I think most of us are wrestling with. And because these things are not covered properly, I bet there are people watching right now who have heard of Graham Plattner but have not heard of all of these things. And because Mary is such a good reporter, such a good journalist, covers things in such detail, she knows about it. And frankly, in that entire paper front page, if only you read that and nothing else, you would know. I bet it's inside. I hope it's inside. But if you saw that whole front page, there's nothing that says who's also problematic, who also has issues, et cetera.
Well, the question here, Sree, I'll just jump in, is that it's still a primary for on the Democratic side between Governor Janet Mills and Graham Plattner.
Mhm.
And I think that there is still a choice that people can make. The question will be, if Graham Plattner wins that primary and is up against Susan Collins, then what decision do you make? And that, I think, is the big question. Doug is saying once it is plated, it can't be donated.
But I've always heard that City Harvest comes and takes the food that you don't eat, you don't put. So maybe it's the plated part. That's what they're talking about. That once it's been plated, and for a dinner like that, 2,000 people, whatever, a lot of it's already plated. Certainly the salads are plated. The salads may have already been on the table when this all started. So, and John says pedestrians weren't thrilled with those sheds either, because they reduced the space for people to walk along the sidewalks. Folks, we're out of time. We love being with all of you on Sundays. This means a lot to us that you would spend time with us. Thank you for sharing this on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, as well as the Digimentors website. Also on Neil's Instagram, follow him on Instagram. I also want to say that we are so proud to be on Spotify as well as Apple Podcasts. What you can do is find us, rate us, and follow us, and that'll help more people discover this show. So please do that. City Harvest accepts prepared plated food if it has never been served to the public, was chilled to 40 degrees or frozen properly, and was prepared by a licensed business. They do not accept food from buffet tables, previously reheated food, or food prepared in home kitchens. So I think this is not about who's right or wrong, but this is about getting the facts right, and that's very helpful. Amy
That's
says,
the
thank you
AI. The
so,
AI overview.
so it's got to be right. No, you can see they're taking it from City Harvest. You can see the source right there, which is important. Yeah. And John says, great show as always. Thank you. Doug says, City Harvest takes prepared food from kitchens, but before plating, we can see there's a little bit of nuance here. And Patricia says, thank you to the entire production team. Well, it's two of us, and we're very happy to be here with you folks. If you like this kind of show, Neil has another show that you should know about. It's called Shining Light on Shadows. It's about mental health. Neil, tell us about it.
Thank you so much, Sree. We started this show just about more than 2 years ago. We're on our third year. The goal was to reduce the stigma around mental health. My co-host, Dawn, and I, twice a month, will tackle a different subject around mental health. We've had people talk about their own experiences. We've had therapists join us. We've had advocates. We're actually doing something special in May. May is Mental Health Awareness Month, Sree. So we're going to be bringing back some of our previous guests. My therapist who joined us in February, Dr. Michael Kane, who was a big hit. Dr. Ellen Albertson, who is a life coach, who was on our show where we did a series of shows around menopause and mental health. And then Candace Sanchez, I co-hosted a show with her several years back. She herself is a coach as well. And we're going to have the three of them on for our first episode in May. So that will be Get the date, May 14th. I'll be sharing information over email. And again, thank you for your support, Sree, and encouragement and sharing the content. It means a lot. And a number of people watching this show also watch and support the mental health show. So thank you very much for your
Thank
support.
you, Neil. Thank you, Neil. It means a lot to everyone that you do it. Want to tell others, if you'd like a show like this or an audio podcast or anything else, please contact Digimentors. Write to Neil at digimentors.group and CC me, Sree at digimentors.group. Also write to Neil to ask to be on our mailing list so that once a week he'll update you on what's coming up on the show. We also have some great giveaways that we're able to do from the New York Times, PDFs that are available nowhere else in the world. And you can find them on digimentors.group, the New York Times read along. Look for that tab and check that out. We are so grateful to everyone who tunes in now or later. And we will be back next Sunday with more news and more discussion around all things media, but focused on the New York Times and its coverage. Thank you so much. We'll be talking about Andrew Hacker with his widow, Claudia Dreyfus, who has been a guest on the show before. Andrew was a two-time guest on the show, predicting accurately that Donald Trump will lose the 2020 election. Of course, Donald Trump, to this day, and his sycophants still say that he won that election. And that's one of the great tragedies of where we are in America. Amy says it means so much to have men talking about mental health and menopause. And you should know, Amy, that it's even rarer for Indian, South Asian men of color to talk about mental health. And the fact that Neil is doing it is very important and working with Dawn to do that. So thank you very much, everybody. Hope you'll check out my Substack, which will have a new newsletter later today, and follow both of us on our various platforms. Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you.